Amsterdam. I'm hoping that this microphone is working well because I have absolutely no voice, and I told Heleen that now I sound like her, which I think is how everybody wants to sound because it sounds kind of sexy. Anyway, I should probably tell you all what kind of shoes I'm wearing because eventually, somewhere in the evening, someone's going to want to know what kind of shoes I'm wearing, and these are Prada shoes. But, you know, there is this tricky thing with these little back straps that always sort of go down and, you know. So actually I was wearing them once in an interview and the journalist was like, yeah, and she was trotting around the Soho house with her slingbacks unslung. Anyway, Sex in the City. How did it begin? How did we get here? And can a woman really have sex like a man? Sex in the City really started years and years ago when I was a young woman, and I moved to New York when I was about 19. I ran away from college, and I was, like a lot of young women, going to the big city to seek fame and fortune and success and possibly a better man than the man that I would have found in my small town. Boy, was I wrong. I actually had this crazy idea when I was in college that I was going to move to New York and go to acting school because I wanted to be a novelist, and I had this crazy idea that I would be able to support myself as a novelist by becoming an actress. I think this is the kind of crazy stuff that 19-year-olds think. Anyway, I did indeed go to acting school, and I somehow managed to have an agent, and I would go on auditions, but of course nothing came of it. And when I was in acting school, all of these other kids would be like, if I don't act, I'm gonna die. And I was like, well, if I don't act, I guess I'm just gonna have my 19th cup of coffee of the day, because that's basically all you do when you're in acting school is drink coffee. Eventually from there, I got a job at Ladies' Home Journal, which is a women's magazine, a very conservative women's magazine. And one of my first tasks of the day was sharpening pencils, which tells you how old I am. I actually had a job where people still use pencils. But I was determined to be the very best pencil sharpener they'd ever had. And indeed, I was. And from there, I graduated to writing titles and blurbs like 4 Fabulous Tuna Surprises. Anyway, I think the important part of the story is that I found myself in New York in the early 80s, sort of at the beginning of, I think, a sea change in the way that women were living their lives. For the first time in history, women were going to college, and then instead of going to college to get their MRS, which is their misses, were actually moving to the big cities to have careers. And in addition to, for the first time, having like such a huge amount of women in the workforce and having corporate jobs, we also were allowed to have sex before marriage. And this caused a huge amount of confusion between the sexes. I mean, women, I spent a lot of my 80s writing for women's magazines and tackling topics like, how do you get a guy to marry you after you've been living with him for 2 years? I think that's probably a question that some of you are still asking in Amsterdam today. From what I've heard, you know, I've met like 3 people who are married, but everybody does seem to be happily living together. So apparently, you know, we went wrong somewhere in New York. But anyway, I ended up having lots of girlfriends who were in the same kinds of situations that I was in, struggling to make sense of this desire to have it all. And of course, you know, because we were in our 20s, none of us were really making a lot of money. We were going to work every day on the subway in our running shoes with our real shoes in grocery bags, and then also occasionally a change of clothing in case we had a date that night and we were planning to get lucky, or in case we had a boyfriend but weren't quite ready to move in with him because we didn't want to put too much pressure on him. And what ended up happening is that there was a big generation of women when I was in my 20s that somehow ended up having lots of adventures and serious boyfriends that would last for a year or 2 years, and we all thought that those relationships would lead to marriage, but they never did. So in the early 90s, I found myself as in my early 30s, and along with my girlfriends, we were looking around kind of saying, like, wait a minute, something's gone a little bit wrong here. All of these romantic expectations that we grew up with, none of them have come true. It was sort of like, oops, we forgot to get married and we forgot to have kids. At the same time, by then, I myself was not successful, but I had some girlfriends who were, and I noticed an interesting thing. My girlfriends were going out and having sex like men. In fact, one of my girlfriends, people say, did you have, one girlfriend like Charlotte, one girlfriend like Miranda, and one like Samantha? The reality is most of my girlfriends were like Samantha. And I was actually the conservative one because all I did was interview a Calvin Klein underwear model in bed. But for instance, one of my girlfriends once slept with a guy who was known to be really bad in bed. And afterward we said, well, how was it? And she said, it was bad. And then she went back and slept with him again. And so we were all like, well, why did you sleep with him again? And she said, because it was so bad, I had to go back just to make sure. Anyway, my big day finally arrived when I'd been working at the New York Observer writing profiles of the kinds of people who you'd probably find in Trading Up, those evil, successful New Yorkers. And the editor-in-chief, for some reason, had some idea that I managed to somehow get people to talk about sex or relationships. I don't know why he had that idea. And he asked me, do you want to have your own column? And I immediately said yes, because I would have been the only woman at the New York Observer with her own column. And then he said, well, what do you think it should be about? And I thought for a second, and I said, well, it should definitely be about me and my friends. So that was how Sex and the City was born. And interestingly, when I was still writing Sex and the City, there were some columns that did not make it into the book. And those columns ended up being For Blondes, ended up being the book that became For Blondes. And, in all of my experiences in New York, I run into lots of different kinds of women. And one of the interesting things about being women who moved to the big city to make it, and not having really the financial support of our families, was that women often found themselves in situations that they wouldn't have imagined themselves to be in when they were younger and innocent. And some of us, I suppose, made the right choices, and I guess you could say that maybe some of these women made the wrong choices, but the reality is that we all had to make some kind of choice about how we were going to live our lives. What were we going to use to get ahead? Were we going to try to get ahead? Or were we just going to let everybody run us over? And were we just going to be little mice? Most of the women that I know didn't end up being little mice, but some of them did end up being somewhat controversial characters. Now, the character of Janey Wilcox is a woman who is a type of woman who I'd seen quite a bit in New York. She's a bit of a controversial character. She's definitely someone who uses whatever she has to get ahead. She does not play by the rules, which I think is one of the reasons why people feel uncomfortable about her. And yet, New York City is naturally the kind of place where a woman like this would go. She would go to a place where there are lots of different kinds of people, and she can sort of get by and get along with her sort of sneaky and manipulative types of behavior without getting drummed out of town. Now, I've already been told in no uncertain terms that here in Amsterdam, women would never use their sexuality to get ahead. Well, in New York, we sometimes have. Anyway, I'm going to read a little bit from Trading Up, and I'm going to read a part where Janey Wilcox has managed to marry, I suppose he would be the ideal kind of guy. He's a mogul, he's fairly good looking, better looking than a lot of moguls anyway. And he's very successful, and he's in his early 40s. Unfortunately for Janey, that ends up not being enough. And, some women have said to me, oh, but, she gets that guy. Shouldn't that be enough? And I've said, well, the interesting thing about life is sometimes when we get these things, they don't always turn out to be what we really want. And, Janey's beginning to understand that conflict. In this part of the book, she is going to a corporate dinner party in Greenwich, Connecticut, with her husband, Selden Rose, and she knows that all of the other women are going to hate her. So she has a little plan. Oh, and do you guys have any idea what, Greenwich, Connecticut is? It's a really rich suburb where people, when they get married and they want to have kids, they go there so they can have, more space. I'm not sure you'll want to wear that to a dinner party in Greenwich, Selden said. What, this? Janey said, looking down at her dress with calculated innocence. What's wrong with it? She asked. Leaning forward in the mirror, she tilted her head to the side, clipping a large gold hoop onto her earlobe. It's just a little, Selden said helplessly, faltering in the face of sartorial description. A little what? Janey asked. It's terribly chic. Isn't it the kind of dress you'd wear to a nightclub? Selden asked. I guess I could, Janey said, frowning. But the fact is, I've been saving it for a special occasion. I see, Selden said, shaking his head as he exited the bathroom. He didn't want to get into a fight with his wife about a dress. On the other hand, he didn't want his wife going to a corporate dinner in Greenwich, Connecticut, looking like a Russian hooker. Maybe you could cover it up with something, like a sweater, he asked. Oh, Selden, don't be ridiculous, she said. Do you know how stupid a sweater would look over this dress? It'd give your friends the impression I was embarrassed to wear it. I wish you were embarrassed to wear it, Selden thought, and then immediately felt guilty. The dress in question was a white plastic vintage mini dress, which Janey had snagged from the designer Michael Kors a few days before. The dress had been designed in the mid-'80s, and there were only 5 in existence. It was a showpiece, really, intended for eventual display in a couture exhibition. But Janey had seen it and had to have it, and against the mild protestations of poor, sweet Michael, had tried it on. The effect, naturally, was startling. It was as if the dress had been made for her. And naturally, poor Michael had had no choice but to lend it to her, in her mind, permanently. It was, she thought, gazing at herself admiringly in the full-length mirror on the wardrobe, the perfect weapon with which to batter the other Splatch-Werner wives. By wearing it, no one would be able to forget that she was the famously glamorous Janey Wilcox, Victoria's Secret model. And the husbands would drool, while the women would gnash their teeth, and there wouldn't be a damn thing they could do about it. If only Selden weren't so uptight, she thought, opening the wardrobe to search for a pair of boots. On the other hand, it was rather amusing. Finding the boots underneath a large pile of shoe boxes, she thought about how easy it was to shock him, and how it gave her such pleasure, for it meant that she was in the driver's seat and had control over him, which all we women know is the important thing. She walked toward him, displaying the complete outfit. With the addition of the patent leather boots, she really did look like a 6th Avenue hooker, Selden thought. With mounting irritation, this was the one evening he'd been looking forward to. He wanted to show off his wife and show her the kind of lifestyle they might have. And once again, she'd somehow managed to inadvertently ruin it. He wished she would wear something a little more normal, something sweet. Why did she always put her desires before his? There was a willfulness about her behavior, as if she knew, but didn't care, how her actions might affect him. Unable once again to express his thoughts, however, he merely said, "How much did the dress cost?" It was a legitimate question. He'd just paid off his American Express bill and had been almost sick at the amount of money she'd spent in Milan on clothing, nearly $40,000. It was I know everyone says, wow, but like if you've ever gone to Milan, I promise you that is not a lot of money. It was impossible, he thought, that anyone could need that much clothing, and here she'd gone and bought another dress. "Why, you silly," she said, playfully chiding him. "If that's all you're worried about, the dress was free, as a matter of fact. The designer gave it to me." "Oh," was all he said, thinking that once again she'd somehow managed to make him look foolish. He had to get out of this mood, he thought, and glancing at his watch, he said, "We should be going. The car's downstairs waiting." At that moment, however, she must have suddenly understood that he wasn't entirely pleased with her, because taking a step forward and cocking her head up at him in a submissive manner, she said, "Why, Selden, what's the matter?" And then, changing her tact, asked, "Don't you want me to look sexy?" in an arch, teasing voice. "Yes, but," he began, thinking that this might be an opening in which he could convince her to change her outfit without tears, but she suddenly knelt down and, with the skilled fingers of an expert, unzipped his pants. Janey attacked her task with gusto, and with a sigh that sounded like pleasure, Selden put his hands on her head, hoping that the act would be finished quickly so they could make it to the dinner on time. A minute ticked by, and he groaned involuntarily. What a fool he was. Nearly every man in America would give his right arm to be in his position, in possession of a wife who was not only an object of desire, but an eager and willing practitioner of sex, who gave satisfaction without being asked. Now we go over to Greenwich. Mark McAdoo and his wife Dodo Blanchette McAdoo lived in a large, recently built monstrosity known derisively as a McMansion. The house, located on a pricey spit of land that jutted out into Long Island Sound, was built along the lines of what the architect imagined a colonial mansion might look like, if indeed such a house had ever existed in history. It had white clapboards and 4 columns that rose from a stepped flagstone entryway. Inside were 4 fireplaces, 6 bedrooms, a conservatory, really an attached greenhouse containing a couple of overstuffed armchairs, and at the back of the house, the pièce de résistance, a 500 square foot state-of-the-art kitchen. In the middle of this kitchen, surrounded by a mess of bowls, cooking utensils, copper pots, 2 Cuisinarts, spilled red wine, and a trail of flour that led mysteriously from the back door to the sink, Dodo Blanchette stood in front of a large butcher block island preparing dinner. Dodo attacked every aspect of her life with the zeal of a determined businesswoman. She was a great believer in improving her skills and was a recent graduate of a 2-week cooking course at the Culinary Institute of America. She had specialized in veal and in turning any kitchen into a disaster area. Standing nearby with an expression of both horror and admiration on her face was Sally Stumack, a teenager who lived next door. Sally was a tall girl who somehow managed to appear both gawky and heavyset at the same time. Her hair was long, blonde, and frizzy, and she wore glasses with the defiant air of a young girl who's determined not to enter into the Beauty Olympics. The ever-enterprising Dodo hired Sally to help her out at dinner parties, Sally's best point being that she was meek and Dodo could boss her around. "Sally, can you get me the whisk?" Dodo demanded. She was making tiny pancakes on which she planned to fold up pieces of smoked salmon topped with salmon roe to serve as a first course. "Where is it?" Sally asked, scurrying around the kitchen like a large, ungainly mouse. "In the sink?" Dodo asked. She poured some milk into a bowl where it splashed out and landed on the Victoria's Secret catalog, open to a page of Janey Wilcox modeling a gold bathing suit. Dodo picked up the catalog and shook the drops of milk into the bowl. "I can't believe Selden Rose is bringing a Victoria's Secret model," she snapped for the 50th time that day. "But isn't she his wife?" Sally squeaked. She'd just found the whisk in the garbage can and was surreptitiously washing it off. For the past hour, Dodo had been going on and on about Janey Wilcox, and Sally wished she would stop. For her part, she'd never met a Victoria's Secret model and was looking forward to it. "The problem is," Dodo said, taking the whisk from Sally, "this Victoria's Secret model is going to throw off the whole balance of power. Every man, including my husband, is going to be drooling over her. And I told him if he even so much as looks in her direction, he won't get a blowjob for a month. Men are like dogs, you know? They respond to positive and negative reinforcement." "I don't know what you're worried about," Sally said. "You're just as beautiful as she is." "That's exactly what I told Mark," Dodo said. She stirred furiously for a moment and then glanced back at the large round clock above the porcelain double sink. "Sweetie, can you take over for a moment? I've got to go upstairs and change." She wiped her hands on the front of the apron she was wearing and hurried out of the room. Now, what you guys should know is Dodo has a secret cocaine problem, and she is secretly having an affair with her husband's best friend, Paul Lovelady. Carolina and Paul Lovelady arrived at exactly 7:30. Carolina leaned over to Dodo for a kiss and asked, "Is she here yet?" And when Dodo shook her head, she leaned over to her other ear and whispered, "Do you have anything?" "In my lingerie drawer," Dodo whispered back. In the past 2 years, Dodo and Carolina had become great friends, mostly due to their shared love of cocaine, a secret they guarded assiduously from their husband. Seeing the two women whispering and suddenly fearful that Dodo had told Carolina about their little affair, Paul said, "What are you two girls whispering about now?" and rolled his eyes at Mark. "Nothing," Dodo said. "We were just talking about the Victoria's Secret model." "Paul's been thinking about her all day," Carolina said. "He won't admit it, but I can always tell exactly what he's thinking." "Can't I, dear?" she asked, patting him on the cheek. Paul experienced another jolt of panic, suddenly wishing that he had never slept with Dodo to begin with. He thought that it was nothing more than a friendly neighborhood fuck. But after the second time, she began calling him every day at work. He was going to have to put an end to it, starting with tonight. But then he caught a glimpse of her breasts, and he changed his mind. She was wearing a suit jacket with only a bra underneath. Her breasts strained out from between the lapels, and he could see the lacy blue of her bra, the same bra she'd been wearing the first time they'd had sex. He immediately remembered the feel of those full, comforting breasts, and he decided that one more time with her wouldn't hurt anyone. especially as his wife was not nearly so well endowed. Carolina was elegant, to be sure, but he stopped finding her sexy after about a year of marriage. The couples went into the living room where bowls of nuts and olives and a platter containing soft French cheeses had been laid out. For 15 minutes, the men talked about office politics while Dodo and Carolina analyzed the personality of one of Dodo's colleagues, a new young female recruit whom, Dodo swore, had been giving her dirty looks. Then the doorbell rang, and after a momentary lapse in conversation, everyone studiously went back to their discussions. Sally opened the door. Once the first guest had arrived, Dodo always let her answer the door as a favor, telling her that it would improve her hostessing skills, but it usually only made Sally feel like a servant. Tonight, however, was different, and she didn't mind playing butler at all. She would be the very first person to clap eyes on this Janey Wilcox character, and she was excited about it. Dodo had mentioned that Janey was probably a killer bitch, and while Sally had come across several killer bitches in her private school, she had yet to meet an adult version. Nor had she ever seen a model in real life. Dodo told her that she wouldn't look anything near as good as her photographs, but Sally wasn't sure. In any case, she certainly wasn't prepared for the vision that met her eyes when she opened the door and, taking a step back in awe, she nearly tripped on the oriental rug. Sally knew that she was tall. She was 16 and nearly 5'10", but Janey appeared to be a creature of Amazon-like proportions. Sally had never seen anyone with such a perfect figure. She didn't know a human being could actually look like that. And then Janey spoke, her voice pouring over Sally like cream. And what she said was, "Are your parents home?" "Oh," Sally said, fumbling with the door handle. "They're not my parents. I live next door," she said helplessly. "That's nice," Janey said, looking around her with what Sally was convinced was amused disdain. There was a large painting of Dodo in the entrance hall, wearing pearls and a peignoir. The painting wasn't very good and had been done from a photograph, and as Janey's eyes alighted on the painting, a brief smile touched her lips, and Sally was suddenly embarrassed for Dodo. "Everyone's in the living room," Sally said helplessly, watching Janey and Selden as they strolled into the next room. Then she scurried gleefully back to the kitchen. Janey Wilcox was every bit as beautiful as her photographs, and Dodo was going to be furious. The only disappointing thing about Janey was her husband, she thought, sneaking a small glass of white wine. Someone who looked like Janey should be with a movie star, not some ordinary guy who seemed just like her father and Mr. McAdoo and every other man in the neighborhood. "Mark," Selden said loudly, entering the living room. Mark looked up. In fact, they all did, and then they all quickly looked away, with the exception of Mark, who came striding forward, his hands outstretched. He clasped Selden's hand in both of his, and then they clapped each other on the back. "This is my wife, Janey," Selden said. Mark smiled, being careful not to appear too friendly, and shook Janey's hand. All of the men were trying to look anywhere except at Janey, Dodo thought with annoyance, which only made it all the more obvious that they wanted to gape at her. Janey was, Dodo thought, exactly what all men wanted, a trashy, sexy, dumb-looking girl. And taking her time, she rose from the couch and crossed the room. "Hello, you must be Janey," she said. "Yes, and you are?" Janey said. "Dodo Blanchette, Mark's wife," Dodo said coldly, fuming that Selden hadn't apprised Janey of at least her name. But then again, she thought, maybe he had, and Janey was simply too stupid to remember it. "Did you have any trouble finding our little abode?" she asked. "Actually, the driver got lost," Janey said. "Sorry about that," Mark McAdoo said. "Dodo's never been very good with directions. She couldn't find her way out of a paper bag." Dodo shot Mark a dirty look. She couldn't decide who she wished more dead, her husband or Janey Wilcox. Thank you. Now Heleen's going to come up. Okay, bitchy women, we know something about that.
Yes.
Actually, I think this is the only theater. Oh, can I have that ashtray? I've ever been in where you can smoke a cigarette.
Well, you may smoke. You may smoke.
So
Good
I'm going
afternoon,
to.
everybody. Can you smoke? I don't know if you can smoke.
I've already seen people smoking.
Go ahead.
Oh, there's a man smoking right here. Stand up. Yay! Oh, thank you. Now, who says that Dutch men aren't chivalrous? What? Okay, that was an inside Dutch joke, sorry.
Okay. I'm gonna give to you 10 one-liners. Some are from your book, so I stole them, and some are from me. So you only say true or false.
Oh, boy.
Right? It's 2 options. In the Netherlands, you will not find women like your heroine, Janey Wilcox, who is a shallow, scheming social climber, or as someone in the book calls her, wow, a narcissistic asshole. It's not you.
False.
False. So you will find them in the Netherlands. Okay.
Well, see, I don't really think Janie's shallow, so.
Well, we will talk about Janey later. You only say true or false now. The battle between sexes will, in the end, always be won by men.
False.
The novel Trading Up is the worst possible commercial New York City could ever have.
Oh, false. Definitely false. It will definitely make people want to go there.
You think so? Married women who depend on their husbands for money are in fact prostitutes.
Oh, that I can't answer.
Yeah.
I guess we'll probably have to say false. That's a tricky question.
You're in doubt. You're not sure.
I'm not sure. No, that's false.
Okay.
Because they don't think that they are.
No, but you think they are.
No, I don't.
Rich, powerful men nearly always make decisions based on their petty little egos.
Probably true.
Probably true. Love is highly overrated.
Well, it depends on what kind of love we're talking about.
Come on, true or false?
That one's a hard one. It is both true and false.
Okay, we'll get back on that
You know,
one
for
too.
those of us who believe they found true love, you know. You know, they probably are deluded. I mean, you just have to think about all those celebrities that get married and they're like, I'm in love, you know, I'm in love. And then they are getting divorced like 6 months later. I've managed to stay married for a year, so I guess I'm feeling pretty confident.
Having children gives a woman's life more meaning than anything else.
That's probably false.
Size does matter. You don't have to. Yeah! Well, this is 8B. I have 10 one-liners, but this is 8B. Blondes have more fun.
That could really be true. For certain reasons, which I am happy to explain
You can explain later.
later.
In times of financial need, you'd better let go of your therapist and hold on to your plastic surgeon.
You know, for a lot of people in America, that is definitely true.
And for you?
Well, I actually don't have a plastic surgeon yet, but if anybody knows a good one, let me know. I'm like saving my money for the inevitable.
Candace Bushnell is a well-respected writer.
That's probably false. Maybe well known, but well respected, probably not.
No.
Although sometimes, you know, people do say that.
Okay. That you are well-respected, or
Yeah.
they respect you?
Oh, well respected.
Okay.
Whether or not they really respect you in the morning is another thing. You know, I've been accused of, you know, if you read my book, you won't respect yourself in the morning.
All right. Well, I want to talk about Trading Up, of course, your latest book. I want to talk about writing, and, well, we have to talk about sex, because, in a functional way, of course, because, well...
Absolutely. We have no personal experience with it ourselves.
No, of course not.
By the way, everyone should know that.
No, it plays a part of in your work, so we just have to talk about it. I went to Amazon.com this afternoon.
Oh boy, the dreaded Amazon.
And one of your readers said, she read Trading Up, "It's always fun, if only for a few hours, to believe that women like that exist." And she means women like
Janey Wilcox.
Janey Wilcox.
Right.
How realistic is Janey Wilcox?
Well, I think that Janey is actually disturbingly realistic. I mean, the thing that I actually love about the character is I could have made her probably like more evil in a sense and more sort of two-dimensionally evil, but she manages to be kind of misguided and evil and confused and kind of naive at the same time. And if you really study women like Janey Wilcox, which I kind of feel like I have, you know, there are always sort of inconsistencies in their character. For instance, Janey sells sex, but doesn't actually like sex that much, and has only had, you know, like 6 orgasms in her life. And I mean, the thing to me that I like about the character is that she is sort of, has a lot of contradictions, and at the same time, probably her biggest flaw is that she's very arrogant, and she doesn't see herself the way she really is, and or the way that others want her to see herself the way she is, which to me really, you know, begs the question of, you know, do we all have to play by the rules and see ourselves the way other people see us? And I think if women were still doing that, you know, none of us would have careers, none of us would be doctors, and none of us would be lawyers, because society always wants women to see themselves the way society wants them to be seen.
But what struck me in Janey is that she's constantly conscious of her own behavior, of the way she's standing. If she sees a child or a dog, she will pet it because it looks good. You know, when nobody's watching, she will kick the dog, I guess.
Oh, no. She actually really likes children and dogs.
But she
actually really does.
She thinks, oh, it looks good when men like it when I'm friendly with children.
Yeah, well, I mean...
And she goes to a window and she knows when I have this position or this angle, my figure is best, and other kind of things. Of course, everyone thinks like in a second, but she thinks them all the time. She's so self-conscious all the time.
Well, I think that when you're writing a book, you bring certain things to the surface, and I do think that all of us, you know, are aware of many, many different things all the time. And, you know, I know that a woman like Janey Wilcox knows how to stand at a party, how to, you know, behave in such a way to attract men. And I would really, you know, guess that most of the women in the audience have at one time or another, if not done these kinds of things, had to go through their heads. I mean, it's almost, I think, as a woman, impossible to get away from certain atavistic rituals that we might engage in to attract men. And, you know, even as little girls, we hear about this kind of behavior and learn about it actually from our other little girlfriends. I mean, you know how when you're, I don't know if most of you can remember when you were a little girl. I mean, I can barely remember it because it was about 100 years ago. But you know, like when you're a little girl or when you're in junior high, there's always some girl who develops before everybody else and gets all this attention from men and somehow absorbs this attention and, you know, becomes incredibly skilled at, you know, displaying certain female motions and that sort of thing to attract men. And Janey's someone who, when she was a girl, was not attractive. Oh, no. So it's almost like she learned all of this stuff suddenly when she was about 18, or, you know, and she went to France and she realized that she had to use her attractiveness in order to survive. Of course, her idea of survival is probably a little bit different than other people's. Her idea of survival is a Chanel bag. But it sort of comes to her suddenly, and I think that's why she's always conscious of it and always conscious of using it. But, you know, it's really important to me with these characters to think a lot about, well, what was she like when she was a girl that has made her the way she is today as an adult?
And could she be a friend of yours?
Definitely. I mean, she probably has been a friend of mine. I do know women like Janey Wilcox, and I think
it's not only her. I mean, I'm talking about her because all the people in the book, in the high society, in the upper class, which you describe very well, they are all constantly aware of who do I talk to, who is important for me, who can I use to get where I want to go. So that's normal.
Well, they're all constantly aware of their position, and to me, I liken it to when you work in a big corporate office, and you know, when you're really young and you have your first day of work and you're so terrified. The fact of the matter is, when you put human beings together in a bunch, or, you know, sort of stick them into a small space, what happens is that, you know, there are all of these little pecking orders that come out. And of course, you know, New York City is a place that's an island, and there are, I think, like 8 million people that live on that teeny tiny little island. So people get somewhat refined in their ideas of, you know, who's where on the food chain and how do I trade up a notch, how do I get ahead a little bit more. I mean, it's almost like, you know, there's experiments where they put rats in a box and see how long it takes for them to kill each other.
You said in the Netherlands you will find women like Janey Wilcox, and you will find social climbers. And have you?
Well, I kind of had to say that.
No, you didn't.
But you know what? I do think that people are people everywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think in a place like Amsterdam, it's a little bit more homogenous in the sense that, you know, it's not like a place like New York where you see really poor people on the streets at the same time as, you know, a limo's driving by and someone's getting out of the limo and going to Harry Winston to spend $100,000 on a ring. So New York City is a place where you constantly see the differences in people's lives, and there is always a little bit of a feeling that no matter what you have, circumstances could go a little bit wrong and you could just tumble down. I mean, for women in New York City, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, really, like, one of the fears was, like, am I going to end up being a bag woman? I've staked basically all of my, intelligence and effort on having a career and making it, but, I don't make that much money, and I don't have a man to take care of me, and if I lose my job, am I going to end up on the street? And that is a real underlying fear for women in New York. And the truth is, we've all seen, cases of women who seem to have it all and be together, and, maybe they're a little bit too crazy, maybe they did sleep with a few too many men, and, you see their apartments get smaller and smaller, you see them at parties looking a little bit more and more desperate, and, it's a reality for people in New York that, you can be up one day and down the next. And, I think that here there probably isn't so much of that feeling that, God, I could be a star tomorrow or in the gutter tomorrow, and I don't know where I'm going to end up.
No, it's not that extreme.
Yeah. Of course, my husband says I'm a drama queen, so I might be making all of this up.
Well, why did you write this book? What did you want to tell us? What's the main thing you wanted to share with us? Why do we need to read this? Besides,
it's fun.
Yes, it's fun, of course. It's
fun. A page turner.
It's fun. It's fun. It's a page turner. It's really great. But you wanted to tell us something, I'm sure.
I think that's always a difficult
question
for a writer to answer because, for me, I just wanted to write a story about people in New York, and, believe me, there are times when I'm like, why did I write about Janey Wilcox, or why didn't I make her nicer? Because the truth is, for me as a writer, having written Sex and the City and Four Blondes, the easiest thing in the world for me to do would be to write about, a nice girl, who everybody likes, and, but for some reason I've chosen to take the more difficult road and write about a more difficult character that not everybody likes. And, I do ask myself, like, you're an idiot. Why did you do that? Why didn't you take the easy road? And I don't know, maybe I'm just like a masochist or something. But I think for me, it's just about writing about human nature. And someone said to me, there are parts of the book that are really depressing. And I said to him, well, am I not supposed to write about things that really happen in life that are depressing because they're depressing? I mean, am I supposed to shy away from that as a writer? I don't think so. So, for me, it's like I'm just
you want to
sort of like
tell it like it is.
Yeah, tell it like it is. Exactly. And of course, the response to people who tell it like it is or try to tell it like it is, oh, we're not like that. Those people are cynical and shallow. And frankly, I can tell you that that's been the reaction to, I'm not saying that I've written a great book, but I will say that that's been the reaction to literally every great book that's probably been written since the 1850s, is that critics have given, that same reaction, like, oh, the characters are cynical. Well, for some reason, 100 years later, they're not. Go figure.
But that's a point, right? Because that's something you hear, and I hear that too from my
I'm sure that
novels,
you hear
like,
this.
Oh, your characters should be more likable. But what is that? Why do people, if they have something to say about the book, and I also read that on Amazon, they say, well, the characters were not that likable. Why do people have that need for likable characters?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we were talking about this earlier. You know, people will say, well, the characters aren't that likable, but they buy the book and they read about them. So, in a way, we must be doing something right here.
That's true.
You know, for me, I always think that there are little bits of those characters in us that we don't want to admit to. And, you know, the reality is, you know, I think if you really, really have a problem with my characters, you kind of need to dig a little bit deeper into yourself, because I don't have a problem with the characters. And I actually don't feel terribly judgmental towards those characters. I mean, call me crazy, but I actually like Janey Wilcox. And I like all the crazy stuff that she does. And, you know, my girlfriends now and I, whenever we're thinking about doing something a little manipulative or calculating, we're like, oh, honey, that's so Janey Wilcox of you. Go for it. I think in a weird way, it kind of allows the reader to see something about themselves that maybe they don't want to accept. And I also think in a way, by Janey being so kind of awful, that the reader, no matter what they've done, can only feel better in comparison. You know, no matter what the reader's done, they can say, well, you know what, I haven't been as bad as Janey. So and she's still alive.
So it's comforting for us, it's comforting. Now there's really a lot about being a prostitute in the book, because Janey's sister, she believes that if you are married and you don't work, you are in fact a prostitute.
Yes, Janey's sister Patty is very troubled by what relationships mean and what they're really about as a woman. And, you know, I think that these kinds of topics are really uncomfortable, but are very good topics to examine, because if
Let's do it. Let's do it. Examine it.
I mean, I think, I mean, to me, it's really only in the last 50 years or so, or maybe the last 30 years, when if you were a woman, you didn't on some level have to get married. And, you know, my grandmother and my mother grew up with expressions like, well, why should a man pay for the cow if he can have the milk for free? And, you know, women were always told, do not explore your sexuality, do not have sex before you get married, because then in some way you're soiled, you know, for your husband or from, you know, a man. Well, you know, why? I mean, I always wondered, like, why? Well, it's really a sort of funny line there between sex and money. And you know, because we're women and, you know, the world has mostly been sexist for the last, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, it's always a bit of a tricky question. And, you know, we have expressions like, well, it's as easy to fall in love with a rich man as it is a poor man. Well, think about it. Like, what are you really telling me? So those are things that, you know, I actually think about. I think that they probably make us uncomfortable. But, you know, I do think that there's a temptation on the part of women, and, you know, I'm sorry, shoot me for saying this, but I still see it out there every day. If you're a man, you do not have to be attractive, you don't have to be nice, but if you got some money, guess what? You could be with a very attractive woman. And, you know, I mean, I go to places like Miami and I see this, you know, in New York. I see this in the Hamptons. I see this in Aspen. You know, maybe we don't see it in Amsterdam, but, you know, you'd certainly see it in London. You'll see it in Paris. And, you know, I mean, I always kind of want to run up to those women and shake them and say, don't do this. You don't really like him, even though you're telling him that you're in love with him. And I saw a really chilling thing when I was on my book tour in Miami. I saw this guy, he obviously had money. He was not attractive. He had a big red face like a tomato, you know, bald on the top, burned scalp. And he was actually probably a nice guy. And he was with this woman she was beautiful. You could tell she was very calculating. And she was like ignoring him. It was like it was so obvious that she was just like with him for his money. And he was like, well, I can't really ask her to, you know, for anything more from her because, you know, she's beautiful and she's with me and aren't I lucky? And then I saw them walking out of their room the next morning and she was just completely ignoring him. She had her headphones on and he was just following her like a little dog. And I just thought, you know what, that is wrong. All wrong. Why are they doing this?
But Janey is doing it all the time.
Well, not really though, because Janey knows that she's using men for money and doesn't really make any bones about it. I mean, she sort of knows what her exchange is, and she knows that she has to get married. And so she marries Selden, and then, of course, she does do what women do. She makes herself fall in love with him.
Yeah, but at a certain point, she sees him wearing Prada.
Oh, I know. Everybody always brings this. There's a point in the book where they're about to get married,
yes.
and he's wearing Prada sandals with socks.
With socks.
Now, the reality is that probably came, I know, and everyone's like, she's so shallow because she's thinking about not marrying him because of the socks and the Prada sandals. But, I mean, I actually have to admit that I often look at men's footwear. And, I have looked at guys and said, you know what, I can't be with that guy. He's wearing socks and sandals. I just can't.
But how do you know? How do you know that you cannot wear socks in Prada sandals? Because I wouldn't know. Sorry. What?
What?
What? I don't know. I don't
Come
know.
up to the stage. Oh, microphones.
There are some microphones
how
somewhere. So if you want to comment, go to a microphone, please.
All right. Now, how many people here know that you're not? First of all, how many people are wearing socks with sandals?
Yes, they are. Yes.
How many people sort of know that maybe you're not supposed to? Okay, it's all women. And those guys over there, yes.
But I think at some point, I'm not sure where, but she figures out, if I want to find true love at some point in my life, I have to be financially independent.
Yes,
I have to have my own career, because when I keep thinking about men and their money, then I cannot really...
She can't really love them. She
really
doesn't trust herself to really love them. And I think, you know, for all of the characters' flaws in a strange way, and of course there's a part in the book where there's a flashback where she really is basically, she's a call girl.
Yes,
you know,
she's
so that line between, well, you know, what's really a prostitute and what really isn't, you know, it's pretty clear in the book. Early on in her life, Janey makes a choice, and she makes a choice out of, you know, somewhat desperation and naivete, but, you know, to me, it's also a choice that I'm kind of fascinated with as well, because if you're an attractive woman, it doesn't even matter. I mean, it's something that women sort of instinctually know, like, oh, well, if things got really, really bad, you know, could I get sex? I mean, could I get money for sex? And, you know, most of us would never do it. You know, God bless the women who do it because I think it's a really, really difficult choice. But you know, for women, it's something that it might go through your head at least once, because the reality is that we live in a society where that's one way for women to make money, whereas, you know, for men, that's not really a choice. Sometimes, you know, men kind of fall into it.
Some men can.
But
we will talk about her orgasms now, because it really worried me, you know.
I know, in your book, she has lots of orgasms. In my book, she has none. But my feeling is you got to earn your orgasms, okay?
Wow. But she, you know, there's sex in the book, not much of it, but she doesn't seem to enjoy it at all. She doesn't.
No,
she just,
well, you know what? I was going to say she doesn't enjoy sex because this is something that I've kind of noticed a bit with very beautiful women. There's so much pressure on them. They have so many men after them and they understand in a way that, you know, their beauty and what it's really about is an obligation to satisfy men. Because, you know, men are always coming on to them, men are always looking to them to be their fantasy come to life. And, you know, one of the first times Janey has sex, you know what, she doesn't really feel anything. And I have to say that's not an unusual experience for women. And, you know, something that maybe we don't really want to talk about that much, but, you know, girls, when you get older, it's a hell of a lot better. But, you know, I do think for young women sometimes, maybe not today.
But she's 33 or
something.
something.
Oh, I know, but, you know, it starts when she has sex when she's 18
yeah, I know.
for the first time, and she doesn't feel anything. So she turns off to it. So it's something that she's carried with her.
Why didn't you give her one orgasm in the book, you know?
Well, you
Just
know what?
one.
I thought about it, but then
400 pages, you know? 400.
Well, I felt like
she deserved one.
You know what? Maybe she did, but I thought she was kind of evil, so I thought, well, maybe she doesn't. You know, but the
you
weird
are
thing
punishing her. You are punishing
I know,
her
I am punishing
for
her.
being beautiful.
But I also think, like, well, I don't know. You know, it's weird, but, you know, I've talked to guys who have slept with, like, models and really beautiful women, and, you know, they're young, and they're like, she just lay there. You know what I mean? She just lay there. She didn't even do anything. It's like, well, I wonder why with you on top of her. But yeah, she's conflicted about sex, definitely.
Yes. And it's, but she doesn't seem...
But wait a minute, when she would have an orgasm, it was tied in with fantasies of killing men.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a little bit of that in the book that might have gotten sort of skipped over, but
I didn't read it.
Yeah, I mean, when she thinks about having sex with a man, she sometimes thinks about strangling him or, you know, stabbing him. So she might...
It's quite arousing.
Yeah. So she might not be having orgasms because she's afraid of losing control. She's afraid of her violent female side.
Okay, well, you should write a new book about it. But that's also, I especially like the scene in which Janey wants to seduce Zizi. Zizi is a polo player. He's a hunk. He's really cute.
He's really good looking.
And really good looking.
We'd like to seduce him.
Yes, and she wants to seduce him, and she's absolutely sure she's going to seduce him, but she doesn't. It's really embarrassing.
It's the most
embarrassing scene in the book,
well,
I think, for
you know,
her.
I mean, for me, when I was writing the book, I was thinking about what are some of the worst secret things that can ever happen to us as women. And one of the worst things would be, you know, everyone's like, oh, you know what, if you come out of the bathroom in your lingerie, there's no way the guy's gonna say no. I was always like, well, what if he does say no? And so Janey gets into this common sort of downslide that I think
really
most
great.
women have experienced, where you go after a man in some way and he rejects you. And instead of picking yourself up with dignity and saying, all right, goodbye, although I think maybe Dutch women could do this, American women cannot, especially New York women. You have to slide further and farther down into degradation, like, why? What's wrong with me? Why why will you sleep with that other woman and not me? And you just go further and further
Would you
down.
please read a bit of that from the book, please?
Oh, I don't know if I can.
Yes, you
Wait,
can.
I don't even know what part.
The part with CZ.
I know, but I don't even know.
You know where it is?
I don't think anybody wants to hear me read anymore.
Yes, no?
No, they don't.
It's fun.
No.
It's really fun. Yes, they do. They do.
No. You know what? You guys should read it you have to read it for yourself, privately, in your own home,
it's really
with
good.
no one else around.
But I think the main thing, she thinks that giving sex is the best thing to do. She thinks, indeed, unzipping pants and going for it, that men will love it. But, well, in Holland, and that's really true, most men like it when the women are
Aggressive.
and excited, and
excited.
and liking it and having orgasms, and they wait until you have them, and then
Yes. Well, you know what? That is true. And that's true in New York. And, I was sort of, it's kind of interesting because I think this character of Janey is a character that I probably have, secretly been researching. And, it's like the men, it's like this is a woman who tells you, I'm the best in bed. I'm the best a man ever had. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you ask guys if that woman who says that was the best in bed that they ever had, they say no. They say oh God, she was making too much effort, jumping around, she couldn't relax, she wouldn't have her orgasm. It's the interesting thing about those kinds of women is they take in literally what society says about women and the beautiful woman and being a sexy woman, and they don't really understand that. I mean, the truth is, I hope for most men, most American men anyway, what really gives them pleasure is for you to have an orgasm.
Yes.
And, but for Janey, having an orgasm is too revealing, so she covers up all of her insecurities about sex by just, going on the guy and trying to, get him to have an orgasm, and then she feels like she has control over him, which in a way is really, I suppose, what men are doing to women. So she's trying to take her pleasure from men in a male kind of way instead of maybe a female way. Initially anyway, because, after a while, let's face it, you just want to jump on top of the guy and, All right, maybe you don't, but
all right. Well, I hope she.
sometimes you do.
Okay.
Now, this is the kind of thing that's going to end up in the newspaper. It's going to end up getting translated into English. My husband's going to read it, and he's going to be like, nah.
You're married for 1 year, so your sex life is
Yeah.
this, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right. You had more than 6 orgasms, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, my whole point about sex is I have orgasms. I don't care if you do or not.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's my kind of girl. Okay. Yes, one of the things that's from the book that has always frustrated Janey is that, sure, she has slept with a lot of men, but because she doesn't come from a rich background, people say that she's a slut. Whereas her friend Mimi, because she comes from wealth, is allowed to do whatever she wants to do and no one criticizes her.
Right.
Is background still that important
Well,
in
I think
New York
that
society?
is that's an observation that Janey has made, and that Janey is using somewhat to explain, her kind of overall lack of success in landing a guy. And, you know, I think it is true to a certain extent that, you know, for a woman like Janey, who is kind of, you know, one of those girls who would sit next to a guy at dinner and then go into the bathroom and, you know, give him a blowjob.
Really strange.
You know there are women who do that?
I know. I've just read about it in a very funny book.
You know, it's like, it again sort of comes down to that money thing. Mimi has money, so her motives are not suspect. Mm-hmm. And you know, I do think it's true that if you're a woman and you have money, your motives are less likely to be suspicious. I mean, in America, we really have the concept of a gold digger. We still have shows that, you know, celebrate women marrying rich men, like, you know, Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire, and lots of people watch it. So, you know, for us, that's still sort of a reality that, oh, well, if everything else goes wrong, you can always marry a rich guy. Of course, you never can, because they always want somebody else, but it's an idea.
Do you consider yourself to be a feministic writer?
Well, I do consider myself to be a feminist, totally.
I think maybe
well, that was actually Janey's fantasy, but,
right.
you know, I mean,
Sure,
I do think...
Sure, Annie.
I do think as a writer, though, you have to allow yourself to be open-minded to all kinds of thoughts. Luckily, one doesn't have to act on them. One's characters can. But, you know, I remember when Bret Easton Ellis wrote American Psycho, and people really thought that, like, he was a psycho killer. It was like, no, it's fiction. I kind of made it up.
Yes. And in the book, I think men win. What I said, you know, the battle between sexes, the men win in the book. They have most of the power, most of the money, even the ugly men have beautiful women, as you have pointed out. So,
right.
Why do they win?
Well, when you asked me before, like, what was the point of writing the book? One of the things that I was really thinking about was this reality that, you know, as far as women have come, the truth is, if you're a woman and you go up against these mogul types, the reality is, if you're a man and you go up against these mogul types, they are going to squash you. They have a secret mogul network that we are all excluded from, and they will kind of like tolerate you, maybe use you, maybe be nice to you a bit, but, you know, very, very rich people, very, very rich men, when you go up against them, as Janey does, and she really is an irritant and a foil to them, and they try to squash her, but they actually don't end up squashing her.
No, but
so they
nearly.
don't actually win, but they really try to squash her, and at the end, they are undamaged. Janey is maybe somehow popped up again, but she is the one who is really, in a sense, had to suffer for their immorality. And I just think that, you know, I mean, maybe just, you know, from my experiences in life and my experiences with some of these kinds of men, is that at a certain point, it is really scary. I mean, these guys don't fuck around. And, you know, as much as we as women think that we've really made strides, which we have, the one thing that we really haven't infiltrated is like that kind of power. And I guess I think it's important for people to understand that, and for women to understand that. It's like, you think you've got this and you think you've got that and you think you can skittle in with these multimillionaire businessmen, which is really the operative word, business, because people who do this kind of high-level business are in a world unto themselves, and frankly, these are the people who rule not the United States, but the world. Of course, I have all these conspiracy theories as well.
But these are all men.
But they are all men, and that's a real scary, in a way, boys' club. And, I'm very interested in things like that. And I'm very interested in the idea of how does a woman challenge that and, get into that and, deal with, like, their very scary rules. And, why is it?
Do you think she can? Could a woman be part of that world? If she
That's
wants,
really
if she wants to, if she really wants to.
That is a question that I am constantly asking myself. Every day I am asking myself that question. Maybe it's a question that nobody cares about, but I kind of feel like, well, I'll probably die from smoking in about 10 years, so I've got to figure something out.
Would you like to be one of those guys?
Yeah. No, I don't want to be one of them, but in a sort of like best case scenario or wild kind of scenario, like would I like to have my own 200-foot yacht and my own private plane and be able to afford it and get it on my own without a man? Yes, there is a part of me that would. I mean, I've been on 200-foot yachts and sort of seeing the way the owners treat the people who, work on the yacht. And I've thought, if that were my yacht, I'd treat those people better. I'm sorry, but I would.
But the yacht
and I'd have all my friends, and they'd be real friends, too.
You would be so sweet. But the yacht is, of course, the bonus. But what it's about is power. But
well, you know what?
Would you want to have that power? When you say they rule the world, you say.
You know what? I really think that's a question. I mean, I don't know if I would want that power, but I kind of think that should be a question that women should be able to ask themselves. Would you want that power? And not have it be, don't even go for it because you know that you can't and you'll never be allowed to, or that if you do and you do get close, you'll be brought down and publicly vilified like Martha Stewart. You will be punished.
You really think that men would stop it?
Well, you know what the
that's
truth
like
is.
A conspiracy theory.
Well, but I do talk to people who are in business, and that's like one of the things that I do. I don't just talk to women, although I think women's lives are fascinating. I do talk to men and I talk to businessmen about what's really going on. And this guy, the interesting thing about the test that Selden is put to by his company sounds kind of horrifying, but the reality is I've been at parties with big CEOs and I've said, if you were told that you had to choose between your job or your wife, what would you choose? And they're like, are you crazy? The job. You always pick work. And, this might not be surprising, but for me it has a bit of an impact when
a bit shocking.
Somebody really says it to your face. And, I just think that women should at least be allowed, if they want to reach those kinds of heights. I mean, of course we all don't. Most men don't want to. But I just don't think that we should be.
But do you think it's the women or it's the men? I think
It's the men.
I think the women do not want it enough to get there. You say it's some conspiracy from men.
I think the problem is that it's difficult to say because if you're a woman and you want it, you see there's so many obstacles along the road that those obstacles can, would be enough to keep you from doing it. And the truth is, it's the same for men as well. I mean, this is like a little club and they kind of decide who's going to make money and who isn't. But anyway, I think like enough of that. Maybe we should do question and answers from the audience.
Okay, does anyone have a question?
I'm sure someone has a question.
For Candace Bushnell.
Maybe we can have the lights come up a little bit.
Yeah, right. There's microphones over there.
All right, people are leaving. That's our like 10th walkout. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello. Where were you on September 11th, and how has the city changed in the last 2 years, if at all?
Well, actually, that's a question that I would prefer not to answer because I had a very close family friend who died, and I just prefer not to talk about it. So I'm sorry. You can ask another question.
Can I have another question? Which of the Sex and the City actresses comes closest to what you wrote? Which one makes you think, yeah, that's exactly what I wrote?
Oh, I'm sorry. Which one?
Which one is close?
Which one makes you think, yeah, that's exactly what I wrote?
What I wrote. Which one's exactly what I wrote? You know, that is a question that comes probably not from an understanding of television and movies and how they work. The way that television works is that, you know, often what happens is they'll think of an idea. You know, there are writers who are, you know, TV writers and TV creators, and they often live in Hollywood, and they come up with an idea for a sitcom or for a TV show. TV shows have very, very specific parameters that have to be met. And I was in a very unusual situation of writing a book that was very interesting to people at HBO and actually to other people as well, and having it be bought to be a TV series. And on TV series, the way it works is that there are always, you know, usually several people who write the episodes, and they all bring a bit of themselves to the writing of these episodes. And, you know, they'll in some ways bring their own interpretations of the characters, you know, to the episodes that they write. And the reality is, no one person could have that much sex. Let's face it. You know, for me, Carrie Bradshaw was my alter ego in the book and the TV series, in the book and the column. And I spent a little bit of time with Sarah Jessica Parker before she started shooting the pilot, and, you know, after, you know, when the series started. And, you know, I mean, that character, you know, Carrie, is a character that's obviously very near and dear to my heart. The book has maybe 25 chapters, and the show probably has about, you know, probably 100 episodes. So, you know, it's, you know, there isn't at this point a character that's, you know, exactly like any character in the book, and, you know, there couldn't be because, you know, the book's only 25 chapters. So, you know, the writers have, you know, taken the characters and given them further and further adventures. Another question?
Up here.
Up there.
Yes, where are you?
I'm behind the speaker. I don't.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Up somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I have two questions for you. The first one is, does Janey masturbate?
That's a good question. Yeah, she probably does. I mean,
How
she'd
come
have
she's only
to,
had
right?
6 orgasms?
And what?
Then how come she's only had 6 orgasms?
Oh, with men.
Oh, okay, okay.
She's only had 6 orgasms with men. That's
That
kind of
clarifies.
specific.
Okay.
My
That's a
second question
comforting
is, being from Florida, one of the other states in the U.S. that has the Clean Indoor Act, I sometimes miss it and sometimes don't, living in Amsterdam. What's your take on the European and Dutch complete opposite end of the no smoking, like with the coffee shops and all that stuff?
You know, oh, okay, what's my take on the coffee shops?
No, the
Smoking,
sort
I
of
think.
opposite attitude towards smoking as well.
Oh,
as
towards
coffee
smoking.
shops and all that.
Well, you know what, there's a more, I guess, think of a tolerant attitude here towards, you know, I guess live and let live, and, not trying to make a bunch of rules that everybody has to follow. And then, the interesting thing about the coffee shops, to me, well, first of all, this is the first time I've come to Amsterdam and have managed to avoid one, which I have to tell you I consider quite an accomplishment. And second of all, it's kind of interesting that, when it's possible for people to do what they want to do, people really do make a choice about it, and it really isn't the way they say it would be in the United States, like, oh, if, marijuana were legal, then everybody would do it. Well, no, the truth is everybody wouldn't, because not everybody likes it. Sorry. So I don't know if that answered your question. I wasn't sure I could totally hear you.
Yeah, yes, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question. Someone is coming up.
It's so scary, like
two
that people have to
people.
get up and walk to
Okay.
a mic.
When you said earlier about women having sex like men, did you mean also that they didn't suffer from the double standard that is usually bestowed on us women when we have sex?
Like a man. I think that's, not suffering from the double standard is something that happens more and more. My sense and my impression is, the double standard comes out of times when men need to feel that women are very different than they are sexually. And, when I started writing Sex and the City, I really was coming out of a time when, in the 80s, I was writing for women's magazines, and people really believed that sexually, men and women were totally different. Okay, women could have jobs, and women could have orgasms, and they could have sex before marriage, but for God's sake, they couldn't have sex without commitment. They couldn't have sex without getting completely emotionally involved. And when I started writing Sex and the City, I realized that, well, actually, that's not true, and what does that mean? And what that told me was something that I always believed, and that is that sexual behavior is more governed by money, status, and power than it is by gender. And, there were all of these things that we said, oh, that's male sexual behavior, and that's female sexual behavior, but it really has to do with, who can get away with what without the consequences. And, when a woman takes care of herself and, has a job and pays for her own apartment and all that kind of stuff, she's a lot freer to do whatever she wants to without those kinds of consequences, because, hey, it doesn't really matter what the guy down the block thinks, does it?
No, it doesn't, but the character in Sex and the City, Samantha, who is my favorite character, is not everyone's favorite character because of the way she behaves, and that she's seen as quite dangerous and abnormal.
In the United States, we don't actually see that character as being dangerous, or I don't have the impression that people see the character as being dangerous. In fact, I think for most women, the character represents sexual freedom. And what usually happens to me is, when I've gone around the country on my book tours, women will always come up to me and say, you know what, I've got a friend just like Samantha, or my friends tell me that I'm just like Samantha. And they love it.
Okay.
So-
One more question, then we have to end this. But you have your opportunity to ask questions to Candace because she's going to sign her books, and then you can ask during the signation. So one more for you.
I was wondering, do you know who your readers are very specifically, and whether they're men or women? And do you know who criticizes you most?
Well, of course, people who criticize me the most are terribly insecure and hypocrites. I think that in general, my sense is that my readers are very much like me, whatever that means. And I've always had male readers since I started writing the column Sex and the City. And actually there was a column that I did before Sex and the City called The Human Cartoon, which was published in the Hamptons. And, you know, it was all about, you know, young people going to the Hamptons and whatever. It was kind of crazy. But the thing about it that I found was that, like, men loved it. All of my friends' fathers loved it. And I found that, you know, there's a certain kind of man who seems to be somewhat worldly and somewhat accepting of himself, who tends to love my work. It's funny because men are not as critical of Janey Wilcox as women are. And I think that's because men understand something that women don't. You know, women like to flatter themselves with, which is that, oh, you know what, we're all really nice. We're women. We're really nice people. Well, you know what, guess what, we're not. And we're not always. And, you know, our friends are not always perfect. Sometimes our friends are a goddamn pain in the ass. And, you know, life is not perfect. And women are not really more perfect than men. But there is a conceit in the world right now that, you know, women are superior to men. And I think it would be, I mean, I know that we'd like to think that, but really, isn't that a conceit? I mean, isn't that really just a way of pushing men aside and putting them down? And, you know, instead, I think we should say, you know what, a lot of us are, you know, we're not perfect. You know, men are not better than women, which is what we had to live with, you know, years ago. And maybe women aren't better than men, and maybe we're all just people. But, you know, there is a certain kind of man that understands there are women out there like Janey Wilcox, and they've met her, and they've tried to date her. And, you know, they're not, you know, I don't get very many men saying there are no women like Janey Wilcox, I promise you.
Okay.
So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
You did good.
And I should go to get the microphone. Well, I don't know where the microphone is, but
Beautiful.
I don't know. Really beautiful. There's no mic.
Doet hij niet meer? Nee, deze doet het, Monique. Monique? Monique. Deze doet het.
I'm sorry. This is a very unusual ending, but there is a book signing which is very usual to the John Adams Institute lectures. I'm really, really thankful for both of the ladies who are on stage. Thanks, Candace, for being so great here after your 24 city tour in the States. I mean, you wouldn't say it because you kept on going, and I was really surprised by your vitality, and everything was so great. Thank you, Heleen, for your very well prepared. Everything looked very well, and there will be book signing here on stage. Both of the ladies will be ready for you. There will be books for sale here, and if you have time, pick up also a brochure of the Institute, because we bring more to you from the States this year. Thank you so much for coming. And now we will put all the chairs aside and there will be a party. Thank you.